So we'll just do a short Q&A. We'll start with questions related to the surah, right? And then if we have time, we'll try and go elsewhere. So maybe we can have like people, if there are several people, we can have them all ask their questions at once. So go ahead.
Yeah, so I had a couple of questions that maybe can be consolidated. But first, I guess the question is seeking a framework from going from a confused state to one where you trust in the divine. Because I've been in this state before where I know what's bothering me. I know that it's a result of just not having enough trust or peace in the divine. But getting from point A to point B is something that I can only see in retrospect, and I can like share it semantically with people who I see are going through a similar thing. But I was sort of searching for a more generalized framework for how to like interrogate our own thoughts and feelings and speed up that process or reduce the confusion that goes on. My second question was related to the phrase used, like that you referred to like the intoxication of love with the divine. And I'm sort of comparing this to learning about Buddhism and how that frame of thought deals with confusion and anxiety. And I know it's probably difficult to explain, but when someone asks, but why should we search or strive toward this sort of intoxicated feeling? Because that seems like in itself, since you mentioned it's really difficult to remain in that state, so you're going to come out of it at times, and it almost feels like desiring that state is going to create its own hardship or sense of separation when we can't sustain it. So why accept or strive toward that when there might be alternative viewpoints, which is more just like seeking to have a sense of perspective or peace at all times, rather than sort of escaping almost into the intoxicating state and falling out of it, if it really is as difficult to attain it constantly as you told us.
We'll take one more question.
So when Dr. Abou El Fadl said our faith goes up and down, so it's like the thing is you never know where you're at. It's not like like if you take an exam, you know what your grade is, you know where you stand with the divine. Here it's like it seems to be, you know, all the time your own assessment, you know, and so we were talking about the diseases of the heart, the envy, you know, what you have and how, so you don't know where you're at. So how can you get to the next level before it's too late? I mean, time goes by and, you know, you don't know what the state of your soul is. How do you measure the state of your soul? How do you measure where am I? Am I on the lowest level of paradise? Am I just below? Am I medium? And of course we all strive to get to the highest, but how do we assess ourselves?
Should we take that?
Do you want to take the number two?
Well, okay, let's add one more.
Add one more? Okay.
So, this story reminds me of, like in philosophy, religion, there's the topic of problem of evil. So, do you think it's a good theodicy?
What's a good theodicy?
It's to see how this resolve the problem of evil.
Oh, okay. Okay, so I was thinking of a way whether I can unite the questions, but I don't think it's possible. First, let me take this issue of the issue of intoxication and so on. The intoxication that I mentioned is never the goal. It is a byproduct. If you ask any murid, any person that is seeking the when you're in like all relations of love, it grants you is a state. The ultimate goal you're seeking is balance and sakina. What is
Peace.
yeah, a state of peace. I mean, so you are when the intoxication is a result of grace, divine interference, and fath min al-futuhat, sort of like a gift, a blessing. Now, do you long for it? I mean, here I'm trying to separate between my journey and, I was taught that you shouldn't long for it. That it's like a gift from Allah. When it comes, it leads to great insights. You see reality for what it is. You understand things that in a flash, things come together in the same way that, if you've been studying the cello suites but in a flash, everything comes together and you understand what the cello suites are all about, and you say, oh my God, I see the genius. It's not an issue of longing for it. You can't have that flash of genius all the time. It leaves you with a deep sense of satisfaction and tranquility. But I will be the first to admit that I violated the rule I was taught. I long for it. And I say so in my writings. I mean, I write about the longing. But I see the wisdom of my teachers in telling me you shouldn't long for it. And that it's improper to long for it. And that, in fact, I remember once being told it's like receiving the revelation. The Prophet ﷺ, it wouldn't make sense for the Prophet ﷺ to say, I long for revelation. He gets revelation, he transmits revelation, that's it. But it's not coherent for him to say, but it's, I guess, but at the same time, I'll tell you, it's human, because we know that there was a time that revelation didn't come to the Prophet for a long period of time, about several months. It was like 9 months in some reports, some reports say 12 months, and it unsettled him. I don't know if he longed for it, but it unsettled him. Anyway, but I mean, so I'm happy you raised this point, because it's not, the goal is not the intoxication. It is the balance, the understanding, the equilibrium, the state of equilibrium that grants you tranquility and peace, and that allows you to rid yourself of anxiety and most of the time of desire for passing things, most of the time. Of course, I am no near perfection, and if I grade myself, and this brings me to Shireen's, if I grade myself as a failure. I would give myself D, F. So, but there is this issue of the balance is that husn al-zanni billah, that you understand Allah, you trust Allah, you trust in Allah's mercy, which always comforts me that I am dealing with a just and fair and merciful God. God is not going to be, I am not going to be more merciful than God, so, or more just than God. And that, by the way, when I even deal with human rights, and it allows me to deal, to think of the ugliness that I see in the world and say, you know, if I desire greater justice and greater mercy, but if within the laws of cosmology and the laws of creation and the laws of causation and the sunnah al-kawn, the laws of the historical laws that Allah embedded within the idea of justice, in the sense that those who do good must yield good and those who do bad yield, I am not going to be more just or merciful than Allah, and so I am ultimately, when all is said and done, I am at peace, although I struggle to change the reality, but I don't detest the process. And that allows me in turn to be at peace with my own existence in this process. So I'm not like the sophists who look at existence with a great deal of disdain. I'm not like those who think, you know, if you're truly just, you should just wish for death because it's such an ugly and horrible and unjust world. You know, I look at existence and history and the future as ultimately a process, a byproduct of a just and merciful God. Anyway, but your question had to do more with so when I say that I grade myself very, very low marks, it's because I know also at the same time that if I allow wishfulness to enter into my process, and I allow arrogance to enter into my process, I've seen so many people who became missing the word, who became complacent with their piety, and very quickly, you know, this notion of just the entire world became this world of wishfulness and taking God's will for granted, and very soon they could not tell the difference between their will and God's will, and it all collapsed into their psyche. Whatever they wanted is what God wanted, and whatever God, you know, and they became ugly, and it's not just ugliness in theory, their own aura changed. I mean, I've seen it. So to guard that, against that, yes, I'm extremely critical of myself, but at the same time, I trust that this is a fair and compassionate God in the way I know this God. And so you should never, you know, the only standard, the only one that you sort of set as I want to follow is the Prophet Muhammad and only human being. Other than that, you try within, and it might be, and I mean this in every sense, it might be with ultimately everything that you were given as a human being. You don't know who is in the balance of Allah, who's higher and who's lower. I mean, we make these assumptions just because someone knows more, or just someone prays more, someone fasts more. or so, that they are closer to Allah. We don't know that, because it is not just our objective physical circumstances, but also everything that Allah knows about us. Our genetic makeup, our families, our opportunities, our, the way that our children, our spouses are. Allah knows what He put into each of our packages. And Allah knows what our potential is and what we realize are. And trusting in a just and fair God is trusting, it's enjoying that tranquility, is as long as I am trying the best that I can, and as long as I'm not being presumptuous about my relationship with Allah, then I walk my own path and make my own peace. And you guard against presumptuous. And by the way, the other thing that I'll say, and again, it's in a very concrete way. How judgmental should you be of yourself? It is in direct proportion to the extent to which you hold yourself as an authority over others, or as authoritative example to others. If you pose as a teacher or as an imam, you must be extremely judgmental of yourself. So it's fair for me to give myself an F and D, because I teach and because I give khutbahs. My God, the responsibility of someone who stands before people at Jum'ah and leads prayer, if you see the amount of warnings that the Prophet ﷺ gave about how they will be responsible in the hereafter, it is terrifying. But for a person who doesn't teach others and doesn't hold themselves, doesn't stand there giving khutbahs or giving lessons or saying, I know, they have every right to be kind and merciful to themselves. And there is a very, it's the same standard that when you say a ruler of a country, the type of judge. In fact, the Quran says when it comes to those that Allah gave a lot of bounties to, they should be so judgmental of themselves that they should think, like the Bible says, that it's easier for what is that expression? The rich person going through the eye of a needle.
Camel.
Yeah, a camel going through the eye of a needle is easier than a rich person going through the eye of a needle. And same applies to rulers, and same applies to teachers. So, I mean, one of the every time I remember the hadith and about the judgment that scholars, and it's terrifying. But as a trust in a just and a compassionate God, because that is the only God that Allah is. And set your, there's no finishing line. It's you achieve one goal to the other. So if you know that you backbite, I mean, just a simple example. So your next goal is, or that you tend to rush through prayer, or you tend to pray, you achieve these concrete goals, and you achieve it, and then you move to the next goal. There is no finish line. So you don't have to worry about, I must reach the intoxication state. No. Why? It might be appropriate for some people, and if Allah knew that it would benefit you, and you're truly, sincere in in your desire for Allah, Allah would have given it to you. It's like some people dream of the Prophet ﷺ, some people don't. My mother, until she died, she would always tell me, one of the things that, and she was extremely pious, one of the most pious people I've ever known in my life. But till the very end, she longed to see the Prophet in a dream. Never happened. some people I meet, and you know, I think to myself, why did they dream of the Prophet? You know, these things, it's like the arzaq. It's like it's from Allah, but we, as long as you believe in a merciful and just, and then you know that God within your own relationship with that God. That relates to the first question that you asked. But the about the up and down relationship. I mean, you know, you could read so much of that, but this is one thing in which I become sort of very like the literalists, like even the Wahhabis in a sense. My experience is that in proportion the time you put in is what you get out. That has been in my experience, and I've actually this was when I was a graduate student. I don't know why I did it, but yeah, it was after the divorce. I sat there and I calculated how many minutes of life we spend in prayer or in dua, and then how many minutes we spend in everything else. And I sat there and it's crazy charts. And it was completely new. It was right before we met, by the way. And you know, it struck me that we really don't. I mean, even if you do your 5 prayers and you do sunnah and do, you know, even it's just the amount, proportion of time that we spend seeking God, and I try to exclude things done with a suspicion or the shubha of having done it for other than godly reasons. Like, if I gave a lecture, but I know that I actually gave the lecture because of the honorarium, or or the prestige or the resume or the CV or whatever. And I have found that it's quite amazing that the more that you put time in it, you get, and that's just from my own perspective on it. When the biggest obstacle to hearing the call of God is ego. And again, that's my experience. When I struggled with the ego and humbled it, I found there were many situations that God was speaking and I wasn't listening. And in a lot of very small things. Yeah. I mean, that's just to cut through a lot of because academics, in the way they answer questions, sometimes can confuse rather than help. So the best way I think I can help is to personalize it, rather than to intellectualize it. The question about theodicy, the issue of evil and good in the Islamic tradition, my God, there's been so much, because initially, initially Muslim theologians were not just responding to, there was a very strong tradition of discourses about the nature of evil and good, and especially the view that was very common in the Near East, that evil and good are more or less represented by two equal powerful gods that wrestle between. So Muslims early on were aware of discourses about the nature of evil and good in Christianity and Judaism and Zoroastrianism and the very rich traditions of the Near East, and they developed especially the people of Khaled, developed vast discourses in investigating the nature of good versus the nature of evil, or in relation to the nature of evil, etc., etc. And then that developed into schools of thought, and so if I'm answering on behalf of the Islamic tradition, I would say no, that's not a necessary answer to the theological question, because there are many different schools of thought. However, my own school of thought, I believe in, and I've changed throughout my life several times. I've settled on many philosophical positions and changed. But right now, I've settled on the theological Muslim position that believes that evil is simply the absence of good, that evil doesn't exist. And the absence of good is evil. The question of why and how I got there and who I read and who I agree with, it's not my invention. That's a very well-known old theological. It's a very long question, but I mean, the surah that we talked about, the intention is not to answer with the nature of evil and the nature of good. The intention is to remind you of the cyclical nature, the cyclical relationship between hardship and ease. And so I wouldn't go as far as saying it attempts in any way to answer the more theological question of what is evil and what is good in a deeper sense. No, that's much bigger.
Amanda?
You want to go first?
Okay. So I want to connect the dots with something that you said at the very beginning, which was allow me to suffer, like who cares about my suffering, so that I could witness others suffering. And I'm connecting the dots with the paradoxical, cyclical experience of suffering or hardship and ease. And that if the transformation is cultured within a person, they don't actually experience the suffering within themselves. It's easily transformed into ease, and kind of going into what Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said about, crying for the followers and not knowing where they were going to end up, and Allah saying to him, don't worry about them.
Yeah.
In that, much like how he was and all of us are able to transform that within us, the hardship to ease, and that it's kind of like the feeling of how heat and ice feel the same, or how love can hurt. And so the dots I was working on connecting is there would be no suffering for you if you got to a point where you could witness others suffering authentically. Is that connecting?
Wow, that's a really good question. It's a good question because I'm going to leave the philosophical debates on the side, and I'll just talk in a because I often reflect the last time, to be very explicit about it. So the last time I got a colon blockage, to be very Colon blockage hurts, really hurts. One of the most painful things you go through. And at that time, I kept wondering about that exact question. Am I suffering? Can I actually claim to myself that I am transcending my suffering? Of course, you lose a lot of weight, you get very ill, and so on. And does God, is that even the goal? I think the aspiration is, there's another story that has always stuck with me about a mystic who was pondering that same question, and he composed a famous poem where he basically says, I love God so much that whatever God tests me with won't matter. Did I mention the story before?
No, but I get that.
Huh?
No, but I get that.
Yeah. And then, as the story goes, that God humbles this person by giving him an habesibol, which is basically where you can't urinate, and urine builds up in your bladder, extremely painful. And when that happened to him, he would go around Baghdad and say, "Unzuru ammakum al-kazzab," look at me, the liar. Because, so the answer is in a word that we actually deal with in another surah, inshallah, if inshallah we get to it. The word isra, that the assumption is that you don't put yourself ahead of others, that your love and compassion, when loving God teaches you compassion, and that compassion for others always makes you think of other human beings as having equal rights to you. But if you then balance your own self-interest versus the interests of other human beings, one equal, I don't know how many, all the people that you encounter in your life, it's very hard for you to put yourself ahead of people. So that the principle is that for you not to selfishly put yourself ahead of others, not that, and for the extent within your abilities to understand, to allow it to temper your sense of suffering with the understanding that suffering is the other side. So in the colon blockage, I would always comfort myself by telling myself throughout this period, good, because you enjoyed a working colon for so much of your life, and inshallah, if God gets me out of this, I will be very grateful for a working colon for so much of my life. And I actually tell Grace this all the time, like every time I say, it is such a blessing to just be able to pass your food normally.
Yeah.
And I practically every single day. Such a blessing. Same thing, I used to be extremely asthmatic. It made me very grateful for lungs, working lungs. When then I get that scary thing, wheezing, that, sort of like the shadow of the asthma attack, I'm so grateful for my lungs, please keep working. I'm just so, and that, there's something very beautiful about that type of gratitude, about not taking anything for granted. And at the same time, it is, and it is quite true that, during this, constantly reminding yourself of gratitude before and after makes suffering much more bearable when when it would be lying to yourself to say, I am not feeling suffering, because you know, all of us are human beings with our own capacities and abilities. You know, I have met people that have reached a status where they don't seem to feel physical suffering anymore. We were just talking about, you know, people that Sufis that I've seen in Egypt who put a sword, you know, through their side of their cheek and they don't bleed, or through their arm and they don't bleed, and they don't. I knew a sheikh until now. I mean, he had colon cancer, and we were just all amazed. The man kept smiling and cracking jokes. Didn't seem to feel anything, but I think I'd be very unfair for myself to aspire for that, and I don't, because it is whatever circumstances Allah facilitated for them. That's the path they walked, and that's the path they reached. But I don't think that's the path that I expect of myself or Allah expects of me.
Thank you.
I just have a simple question regarding
There are no simple questions. You know that? There's nothing simple.
regarding number 4 and 5 in Nama Usulu, so find Nama Usulu, so Nama Usulu, and then the meaning that is actually double. I cannot, the way I understand it, I just want to double check that it's a presumptuous or inaccurate understanding. According to Ibn Juzai and then Razi, and then the significance of it actually being repeated, would it be right for me to understand that's basically one of the sunnah of God that people would do? It's like the duality, like night and day. Like there's no success without failures. There's no sadness there's no happiness without sadness. And then people would have to go through that. And then if one actually indulge in like prayer and being grateful, it makes the failure part is more bearable.
Yes. I mean, but you're talking about not the repetition necessarily, but the fact that it says mixed in with hardship is ease.
Oh, yes, and then the fact that it's repeated is basically like the way I see it is like God telling me, okay, this is the rule, and this will always be the rule until the end of time.
Yeah, that's accurate. That's right.
But also the repetition, the confirmation, like you said, I feel like the first one is al-hal, like you said, and the second one is more of the acceptance of al-hal. Then what do you think?
Yeah.
It's like
that's actually pretty good. Yeah. فإن مع العسر يسرا. Yeah, I mean, of course, in the affirmation, in you know, when the resoluteness of it, if you respond to resoluteness, it is acceptance. Even in language, common Arabic language, when you affirm something and repeat it, it's like saying you have to accept that. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So yeah.
And also, I love the fact that you said that it's circular in the surah.
Yeah.
Because when you think of it, إِنَّ شَرَحْنَا لَكَ صَدْرَكَ, and then if you really imagine the circle and they go to the end, فَإِلَى رَبِّكَ فَارْغَب. You know, إِنَّ شَرَحْنَا لَكَ صَدْرَك.
فإلى ربك فارغب. Yeah.
So it's fantastic, the connection, I think, between the first and the last one.
This is why Surah Sharh, I mean, even people, I believe that a lot of people who memorize it, once they know the meaning, they know it's like this circular beauty in the surah touches their heart, so that once you mention it to them, it's as if they've known it all along. It's like it's something innate in them, is aware of it, even if they are not consciously aware of it. So, I mean, over the years when I've mentioned this to people about Surah Sharh, they say, oh, wow, yeah, I've always felt that way.
It has light. It has light. But also one tiny thing about the opening of the chest of the Rasul that I never heard of. That's the first time I hear it. I mean, why would God need to open the chest of the Prophet if he is the creator of the heart and of the Prophet, number one. Number two, why would he do it 5 times? Even if, let's say, we accepted the
I mean,
first one.
the 5 times, of course, it's in some reports. I mean, it's some reports, so it's not everyone's view that it happened 5 times, but
It's the first time I
but,
hear it.
yeah.
Oh.
I mean, it's how many did anyone else hear of it before?
Yeah, I've heard it.
Okay, so
Really?
yeah, I mean,
Very common.
Experience.
First time.
I have a big problem with it. I mean,
It's exactly like the crucifixion of Jesus. It's the same.
in the old days when I would actually, believe it or not, there was once upon a time a period in my life where I would give talks to children. I can't imagine it now. I'm like the most.
Yeah.
Are you kidding? I never, even when I was in my 20s, I was not fit to speak to children. I feel sorry for these kids. I confuse the heck out of them. I think I probably ruined their life forever. I still remember their faces. There were people at ISNA who, for some reason, gave me children to speak to, and I still remember their poor faces. And it's part of like realizing that, okay, you don't do this. It's not right. But I was. I mean, they had all learned from the Islamic school that this is like you cannot. And of course, the kids wanted to know if the story is true, and I gave them I started giving them schools of thought, and this person said, and this person said,
My
and
position is controversial.
I didn't say that. I just gave them schools of thought, and I don't know what. Anyway, so yeah, it was very interesting. I got kicked out eventually. I don't actually blame them. I think they did the right thing.
Dr. Abou El Fadl, when I connect to the story of the Rasul, I'm sorry, well, tiny little. When you connect the story of the Rasul and Alam Nashrah Laka Sadrak, does in Sharh, I know that it's in Sharh, of course, but does it come from Sharh also?
Yeah.
Nashrah,
To explain is to expand something. Expand the intellect or
So
expand
it
the
has,
shar.
yeah,
Yeah.
it has the double,
It's the same.
yeah.
And by the way, the same word we use for surgery, sharrahtu,
Sharh, yeah.
because it comes to the expression sharrah al-lahm, which means to cut the meat up in preparation for cooking.
Slicing.
So slicing. And so it all is rooted in the same thing, to open, to spread, to expand.
So maybe that's where it comes from. Alam Nashrah Laka Sadrak. Some people
That's why
explain
they
it
always
this way.
like we split your chest open, but no,
It ruins the surah.
Okay, so we're past 10 o'clock now.
Okay.
So we should
Is it?
stop. Yeah.
Oh,
I feel I'm thank God for our dogs, because like on days like this they have to get stuck, at home, like in a room, and like just waiting.
I leave the Quran on for them. I actually put it on the Quran channel. I mean, I know that this will probably upset some people. But I put it on the Quran channel. I think the dogs enjoy it. Haram, why not?
Huh?
Huh?
I thought it's like in the Surah Al-Kahf about the dogs.
Oh, I don't go that far where I actually put the surah. I just think I've noticed that it has a comforting, whenever I have the Quran on, the dogs calm down, and they come and they spin Batuta will lay at my feet, and they become very calm, and I don't think our dogs are weird. I think it's actually,
No.
yeah. You realize that, see, this is why I like conference, because it's like immediately I'm like starting to freak out that I'm mentioning Quran and dogs in the same word in public, and that's because I'm an immigrant, and fear and cowardice have been drilled into me from my childhood. If I was a convert, it wouldn't even occur to me.
Happens to be.
Fear and
Yeah.
cowardness, that's how they control. the
Yeah,
masses.
it's they feed it to us in our milk. You shall be afraid.
Yeah.
the rulers and these are your true gods, and then there's no Islam with oppression, no Islam with despotism. It's deformed, hypocritical, that, you know, beauty needs freedom. Okay, alhamdulillah.
Thank you very much.
Very much.
Thank you guys.